All right, let's jump in. We're going to unpack the long, pretty complex history of the Latin Mass, a sacred rite that, you might have noticed, has become a huge source of controversy lately.
So where does all this modern tension come from? Well, let's dive right into the heart of it. It really all kicks off with a pretty recent and honestly very significant papal decree.
Yeah, so back in 2021, Pope Francis said this, and it came alongside some what many felt were painful new restrictions on using the traditional Latin Mass. And we're talking about a rite that's been a cornerstone of the Church for centuries.
So this just begs the question, right? How did a sacred rite, one that's been practiced for more than 1,800 years, suddenly become the subject of modern restrictions? To even begin to answer that, we've got to go way, way back, to the very beginning.
So, let's rewind the clock. We're going to trace the ancient roots of this Roman rite and see how it grew and changed over its first millennium.
You know, this liturgy wasn't built in a day. Its foundations were laid over centuries. It starts with a really pivotal shift way back in the 2nd century, when Pope Victor I started moving the Church's official language from Greek over to Latin. That's a huge deal. Then, fast forward a few hundred years, and you get Pope Gregory the Great. He comes in and really organizes the Mass into a more standard form. And of course, he's the one who popularized that iconic Gregorian chant, creating a liturgy that would, literally echo through the ages.
Okay, so for centuries, the rite kind of develops organically. But then we hit the 16th century and everything changes. This was a major turning point, a moment that was going to codify or, lock in Catholic worship for generations to come.
And this is where we get the term Tridentine Mass. You'll hear this a lot. It's pretty simple, really. It comes from the Council of Trent. The Latin name for the city of Trent was Tridentum. So there you go, Tridentine Mass. And this wasn't just a small change, it was absolutely pivotal. In 1570, Pope Pius V made the Tridentine Mass the official, obligatory rite for the entire Latin Church. Think about that. One single, unified liturgy was established, and this exact form would be the spiritual food for the Church for the next 400 years. 400 years.
So for 4 whole centuries, this liturgy stays pretty much the same. Stable, unchanged. But then, the 20th century arrives, and with it comes the single most significant moment of liturgical reform in, all of modern history.
We're talking about the Second Vatican Council, or Vatican II, from 1962 to 65. The whole idea was to make the liturgy more accessible, more understandable for modern people. And boy, did it set things in motion. The reforms that came out of this council would completely reshape the Catholic experience for millions and millions of people all over the globe.
So what was the core change? Well, here it is. The Tridentine Mass, the one celebrated only in Latin for centuries, was, for the most part, replaced by the Mass of Paul VI. You probably know it as the Novus Ordo. And the huge difference? This new form allowed worship in local languages, English, Spanish, French, you name it. And it quickly, very quickly, became the new standard for Catholics everywhere.
Okay, before we get into the modern tug of war over this, let's just pause and think about this number for a second. 1,800 plus years. That is an insane amount of time. This isn't just some old tradition. Its roots run deeper than almost any institution in the entire Western world. And you have to keep that context in mind to really get why the tensions that followed were so intense.
So in the decades that followed all these big reforms, you start to see this. It's like a liturgical pendulum swinging back and forth. You have different popes taking very, very different approaches to the old Mass.
And you can see that pendulum swing right here. First, you have John Paul II. In the 80s, he starts granting these special permissions or indults for bishops who wanted to allow the old Mass for people attached to it. So he cracks the door open a little. Then Pope Benedict XVI comes along in 2007 and swings that door wide open with Summorum Pontificum. He basically says, hey, both forms of the Mass are legitimate and can enrich the Church. But then, in 2021, Pope Francis completely changes direction with Traditionis Custodes. He supersedes all those previous permissions and imposes really significant new restrictions, citing concerns about Church unity.
And all of that history, that whole back and forth, brings us right back to today. And it leaves us with some really difficult questions about what the future holds for this ancient rite.
So, when we look at the source material we've been unpacking, it paints a pretty complex picture. On one hand, it highlights how the Latin Mass nurtured countless generations of Catholics. Its sheer longevity is seen as a testament to its enduring power.
But it also brings up a very modern concern, that the way the Novus Ordo is often celebrated could be risking a crisis of faith. Yet, despite all that, there's this feeling of pessimism. The source suggests that a full, widespread restoration of the traditional Latin Mass, it's probably not going to happen, not even in 100 years.
Which leaves us with one final and pretty profound question to think about. When a tradition has spanned millennia, who actually gets to decide its future? It really makes you think about the nature of tradition, authority, and what it means to change something that has existed for so long.